Hey, in my Travel Ones podcast, I'm lucky to have Laura Sanko today. Laura is an ex-pro fighter, MMA fighter, and now is a correspondent and reporter for the UFC, as well as, I believe, still in Invicta. How are you today, Laura?
I'm good. I'm great. I'm for once not traveling, which is kind of weird, but also a nice little reprieve over the holidays here. But yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you for asking.
Oh, absolutely. You know, it's interesting. We were just talking before. It's first time in a decade for me that I'm not traveling. But fortunately for you, the UFC has found alternative ways to make sure fighters still fight, which means you still get to report.
Yeah, exactly. It's been, a lot of people I know, they've really had to change their travel habits, whether they were traveling professionally or just, for fun or to see family. I know a lot of people have kind of changed their patterns this year. But for me, really May through now, I've been pretty much going nonstop. I think I was trying to count it up the other day, and I think I've taken about 60 trips. Now that's one, so I guess 30 round trips between then and now. So it's been busy.
For the people that aren't UFC fans, you're not like taking a trip from like Kansas City to Nashville. How many trips have you made to Abu Dhabi?
I've made 2 to Abu Dhabi so far, and then I'll be making another one here coming up in the next couple weeks. So headed back there yet again, and that's definitely a longer one. It's not the longest I've done for the UFC though. The longest one was Singapore. That was a doozy.
Yeah, because you're going the other way. Wow.
Yeah. Singapore is definitely a long one. Anytime we go to Australia, I gotta kind of get my mind prepared for those long trips for sure. Well,
that's what I was going to ask you. Is I don't know that a lot of people put a lot of weight into time, the travel for a professional athlete, and then even for a reporter. I mean, you have to be on your toes, spot on, and you might be talking at 3 a.m. to your body as far as the time change and everything, jet lag.
Yeah, that part of it is huge. Learning to manage jet lag, and then also just I'm someone I don't travel well is the funny thing. I'm not I'm not one of those people whose body acclimates easily. I need my sleep in order to really, really feel on top of my game.
Sure.
So it's a challenge for me for sure. And I've kind of over the years learned how to deal with it in various ways. Melatonin and CBD, all that type of stuff. And then also just other things I do to kind of help myself acclimate once I get to where I'm going. But Abu Dhabi in particular is really tricky because it depends on when we're doing the shows. So the last 2 times I was there, the broadcasts were maintaining a U.S. schedule.
Yeah.
So we were starting, like my work day would start at 1 a.m. in Abu Dhabi. So, and I had typically I will have been there about a week at that point. So trying to stay on a U.S. schedule while in Abu Dhabi is probably the hardest thing about it. And I haven't spoken to anybody, broadcaster or athlete alike, that has really done it successfully. It's really hard to fight those natural rhythms, and you kind of get caught in this no man's land of just taking 3 and 4 hour chunks of naps and never really getting a full night's sleep, and that really wears on you. And like you say, I mean, it's a real X factor for the athletes that go there. I know a lot of them, particularly the higher profile athletes, will try to get their managers to negotiate that they come out a little bit even earlier to Abu Dhabi to acclimate and to try to acclimate. But again, it's this big question. Well, do you acclimate to Abu Dhabi time, or do you try to stay on U.S. time?
Yeah.
It's a giant mess.
Because I've talked to some of the Olympic athletes, and they have the same issues. If they're competing in Russia or Tokyo for the Winter Games, it really messed them up. Because all of a sudden, what time are they competing and all that? So fighting's the same way. And then because I was like, how can this fight be live if it's in the middle of, like at 7:00 here? Because that'd be like 1 a.m, 2 a.m. in Abu Dhabi. And they're like, yeah. And I was like, oh shoot, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So what little secrets have you picked up? You said the CBD and the melatonin. Like for me, I use a sleep mask.
Oh yeah, that's huge. That's a must for me. A sleep mask, melatonin, CBD, and then I've talked to my doctor about this. Benadryl is perfectly, healthy to take on a super regular basis. You're not going to mess anything up. So I typically have a nice little mixture of melatonin, CBD, Benadryl, the sleep mask, and then never, if I am going to nap, just never allowing myself to nap more than 30 minutes at a time. That I feel like really makes a huge difference in terms of a reset nap.
Yeah.
And the UFC, interestingly, has given their athletes, as well as some of the staff and broadcasters, access to these things called Aura Rings. And more than anything, I mean, it's a fitness tracker, but more than anything, it's a sleep tracker. So I'm able to really see on a probably much more greater detail than I really need to see in terms of, how much REM sleep, how much deep sleep, how much light sleep, how long it took me to fall asleep, and all those types of things. And it'll calculate a readiness score for you in the morning, basically in terms of how, based on your sleep and other habits, how ready are you to have a hard workout that day? And it'll tell you, hey, baby, you should rest a little bit more, or, no, you're ready to go.
The other crazy thing I was thinking about, having, if you had to travel, is the weight cut as well for the fighters, I guess.
Oh, it's massive. Yeah. I mean, anybody who's traveled, especially those longer flights, anything international, and while you're eating on the plane, I think for whatever reason, plane food, I don't know if it's the sodium or whatever, but you always land feeling just bloated and, not good. There's really no other way to put it. It's just not good. And that's a real factor for the athletes because, as you say, many of them are at least in the beginning stages of cutting weight. And sometimes it's a last-minute fight or, the person that comes to mind was Jorge Masvidal, who kind of stepped in last minute and saved the day when he fought Kamaru Usman. He was a super last-minute replacement, still had to make weight, and had to make the 16-hour flight from Las Vegas to Abu Dhabi, and just the water retention that happens when you're on that long of a flight and having to compensate for that. But they've got all sorts of techniques. A lot of fighters I know will have what they call, a shakeout of some sort. As soon as they hit the ground, as soon as they get to the hotel and put their bags, they immediately go and work out either a jog or the hit mitts just to kind of, get that initial water weight off, get some sweat out and get their body, kind of under the idea that, okay, we're here for work, for sure.
I know you don't have the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask you anyways. What would be the negatives of having weigh-ins the day of the fight?
Well, it's just, it's an interesting concept. I mean, it's a safety thing. So you have to kind of, one argument would be, okay, day of weigh-ins would mean that people were cutting less weight. Right. But it also, the flip side to that coin is that people are also having less time to rehydrate. And I think that's the biggest thing is they came into this with the idea that they wanted to give people an ample amount of time to rehydrate. And back in the old school days, that was helped out by IVs. I mean, you could get an IV. I used to do that before my fights. Now, again, the argument can be made, well, but they would be cutting less if it was day of weigh-in. I also think it's, a bit of a logistical issue in terms of fighters who don't make weight and then they have to adjust the fight weight or they have to reschedule the fight. It just allows a little bit more time to get replacements in. But it really, at the end of the day, it comes down to it's a hydration issue because they want people to have as much hydration in their body, before they go out there and fight. I think it's a little bit different with wrestling because you're not taking shots to the head. And as we all know, the brain is situated in a nice little pool of water. And when you're as dehydrated as some of these athletes get to make weight, it changes how much water is surrounding the brain. So they want to give that in particular enough time to, be where it should be before they go out there and get punched.
Well, I know, like jiu-jitsu tournaments, they would make us weigh in with their gi on. So I mean, like right before you'd step out on the mat. So
yeah, and that's just sort of nuances of the sport. It's a little bit different in wrestling. It's different in jiu-jitsu. I never did judo growing up, but I imagine there'd be some nuances to the way they do it as well. But again, those sports, you're not taking blows to the head. So I think that's the biggest difference there.
Yeah, but there was only so much weight I could cut, so I knew at a certain point I had to go and do what I had to do at whatever weight I was at. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
I know there's just, because the weight cuts, man, it's now with social media, you actually get to see people cut weight. You're like, holy Christ, it's not pretty.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's an intense process. And what's amazing is the people who really have it down to a science. The nutritionist, like Tyler Minton, is a good friend of mine, and it's pretty incredible how over time they really have determined, and again, it varies from person to person, male versus female.
Yeah.
How long your camp was. If this is a last minute thing, they're going to have you diet and cut weight very differently if you had 2 weeks to prepare versus if you had 6 weeks to prepare. And it's pretty amazing, though, the ways that you can manipulate the human body if that's your goal, to do that. It's pretty crazy to see. It's so different than, like, I have other friends that do fitness competitions, and of course they're cutting weight, but they're cutting weight in with a particular outcome in mind in terms of the way that they look, right? It's not necessarily about performance. It's about your muscles showing versus MMA. Yeah, it's nice if your muscles show, but like, it's really just about making the weight and then, feeling as good as you possibly can 24 hours later. So it's a different process.
I met Iris Kyle, who's a 7-time maybe 8-time. She get mad if I say that, Miss Olympia, and she's just huge. But whenever I talked to her before a competition, she'd be like, "Pete, I can't talk to you right now. I'm miserable. I'm cutting weight. I'm losing water." I'm like, "Oh, okay. I'll talk to you when it's all over." So
yeah, it messes. It's hard to be a pleasant person when you're cutting weight.
Yeah,
hungry and thirsty, and just uncomfortable and tired, and ready to get the show on the road for sure. It's being hangry for a month straight is a real thing.
Exactly. Well, so I was going to ask you too, because you got it. You started MMA fighting back before it was vogue for women. That's pre Ronda Rousey, I guess. And so you were fighting because you wanted to fight. There was no money in women's fighting back in that day, at that time, right?
Yeah, that's true. And I appreciate you saying that, because it's such a different thing than it is now, I love to see how the sport has grown, particularly for women, but it's so true. Like, I didn't get into this sport because I wanted to, I thought maybe I could be famous one day, or I thought maybe I could be rich one day, or I could be some really well-known, well-respected fighter. I just did it because I loved it, and I loved the challenge on a really individual, personal level, because there was no money in it, and no fame, and no, not much of a future, except for a handful of women, and even them at the time. When I started in my first fight, I want to say it was 2009, maybe 10. I can't remember now when my first amateur fight was. But at that time, Chris Cyborg was fairly well known, but again, not in any way to the general public. Not in any way to the general public. Well, certainly not in the way that Ronda Rousey was. And even as good as she was at the time, not making, what you would consider to be major money. So yeah, it was definitely just the challenge of doing it, and the love of it, for sure.
Yeah. So now that you've seen, there's still no atomweight, and well, Invicta has it, I guess, but I don't think Bellator does.
No, I don't believe so.
And so, even the small girls and even the bigger girls, there's that one. What's her name? The big girl, and she's like 180, 190.
Oh, I can think. Is that Josette Cotton?
No, she was a jiu-jitsu player.
Oh, Gabby Garcia.
Gabby Garcia, yeah.
Yep.
And so they're still not, you don't have weight groups, weight ranges for them, for the small people and the bigger people, but it's gotten better, obviously. I mean, it's got to be exciting for you to talk about and interview other fighters that are now succeeding off something, you not that you started it, but you were there pretty much at the beginning of women's MMA.
Yeah, it is really cool to see. And I mean, I would say I wasn't the first generation, but maybe you could consider me the second generation. So there's definitely women that are more OG than I am. But yeah, there's certainly, I think anytime you had more than a couple of fights before Ronda was a thing, that you could consider yourself an OG, in some respects. Yeah, it has been amazing to see. And like, when I lived in New York City, I trained at this really tiny gym that was predominantly a boxing gym, but there was one little corner where it had MMA classes, and there were like 5 of us, and our mat was the size of a postage stamp, and just we were kind of like shoved in the corner, quite literally and figuratively. And then there'd be Muay Thai classes and boxing classes, and every once in a while I would hop into a Muay Thai class, and I would always get paired up with this one girl because she was sort of my size. She's still bigger than I was, but about as close to my size as anybody in the class was. And so we, drilled together and stuff. And I wouldn't say I didn't know her super well, but I knew her because we would get paired up a lot. Yeah. And it was so funny because then years later, I turn on the UFC and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's Angela Hill. That is so crazy. That's and awesome. Then, she had a couple fights and things didn't go her way. And then she made it back to Invicta. And I remember when she won the belt and I interviewed her, and afterwards I was like, how crazy is it that these 2 girls that randomly were living in New York City, training at the same gym, not Henzo Gracie's, it was just a small gym. And then here we are. So it's definitely cool to see the growth of people that have stuck around the sport long enough to see women's MMA come to fruition and really see it take off the way that it has in the last few years.
That, and it's also a constant reminder that we're getting old.
Yeah, that too.
I remember training when Brian Ortega was a green belt.
Oh wow, that is crazy. I love Brian. He's such a good guy.
He's a cool dude. But so when you're flying out, you're a mom and a wife, so it's not like you just not some single person just going down. Let's fly to Abu Dhabi this week. And how do you end up scheduling and balancing, being gone, and then and it's not like you come back from Abu Dhabi. It's not like the next day you're like, okay, let's go back to normal schedule. It takes you a while to get acclimated back to Missouri time.
Yeah, that's hard. I guess the biggest thing I could say is that I have a very understanding and very willing to help husband, and he has, believe it or not, an even busier schedule than I do. There was a time where he was traveling more than I was. Now his travel schedule slowed down a little bit because he owns the company that takes up all his time, so he can to a pretty good degree control where he is and when. But obviously there are certain things that happen that he's got to be there for. So, but as an owner of a company, you don't have a beginning to your day and you don't have an end to your day. You're always at work pretty much because it's in the manufacturing world too. So they run machines 24 hours a day sometimes, and he gets calls at 3 a.m. and like, hey, this machine's down. What do we do? That type of stuff. So all that to say, it's not like he's sitting at home on his hands by any stretch of the imagination. So to fill in the gaps, we also have an amazing nanny who's like a part of our family, and between her and my husband, they get it done when I'm not here, but I know they're happy to have me back when I do come back.
What do you think? I know for my wife, because I'm gone about 110 to 120 days a year, for us, it's just a lot of communication. Like, we put up grease boards, and I'm like, no, I told you I was going to be here. Look, I showed you right here on the calendar. I was going to be gone for these 3 days. So and then we do it. We have a date night. If I'm home, once a week we have a date night. That's just kind of our deal, just to make sure we don't forget that we love each other. Yeah,
we try to do stuff like that for sure. It's been a little bit harder, which is with things shut down the way they are, but especially with having a little one at home. I mean, when I'm home, that's the biggest thing I think is when I'm home, I try very hard to really truly be at home. I will, to a degree, I try to save my homework for when I'm on the road. So as soon as I leave my house and I'm headed to the airport, that's when I really start digging in, and I'm listening to interviews and I'm reading articles, and I'll try to dedicate a little bit of time to research, but I really try very, very hard to be as close to 100% mom as I can be when I'm home, and then 100% reporter as soon as I leave the house or as soon as I have to, kind of switch into that gear. So I try to be very present with him and not, because listen, especially as many events as the UFC has, and I do watch them all, it would be easy and to be eaten up by the 24-hour news cycle, within our own sport, because it's there. There's always something to be watching or listening to or keeping up on or watching the next card or setting this next bout, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
But I try to kind of compress it to where I'm not constantly thinking about something else when I'm around my family.
Well, I think that's the other thing I don't think a lot of casual fans would understand is, like I watch your interviews and I'm like, there's no doubt you know what you're talking about. You're not faking it. You're not, fighters, you've watched them fight, and there's a lot more to being an interviewer than just showing up and being a pretty face like John Anik. Right? He's a pretty face.
Oh, for sure. No, for sure there is. It definitely helps that I did the sport. I mean, I think that makes a massive difference. There's certainly, Megan O'Leary is a great example. She is much better than I am in a lot of ways in terms because she went to broadcasting school. And a lot of times, she has the television polish that there's certainly moments where I laugh. Wow. But I feel like I'm kind of a different flavor in that I did the sport, and I feel like I'm able to have really good rapport with the fighters right off the bat, just because I think most of them at this point know that I have that history. And even though I didn't have some long career to be able to, sit back and look at, having been in the cage, I think everyone feels this way. Like if you've been in there even once, then you're kind of cut from a different cloth, or like you get it in a way that you'll never get it unless you've done it. It's just really, really difficult to explain. And obviously the more that you've done it, the better. But I think that does make a big difference. But on top of that, I do an immense amount of homework because I don't think it's really fair for me to show up and ask, overly basic questions. I think the fans in MMA are, generally speaking, pretty educated fans.
Yeah.
They're difficult. They can be mean sometimes, but they really want to know. They really want to know the nuances of stuff. So I try to. I don't know. I try to ask questions that if I was watching the fight, I would want to know about the fight afterwards, or I would want to know about the fighter, or what they were thinking, or why they did this, or what they want to do next, and really kind of help them tell the story of what was going on with them right before the fight, what happened to them during the fight, and then now, with whatever outcome it was, what do you want to do now, or what are you thinking now, or what are you feeling now, or kind of walk them through that story in as short a time as sometimes 3 minutes. That's the hard time. Is just like being able to encapsulate that in such a short period of time is tricky.
Well, and then especially if they've taken some damage as well.
It's never easy to talk to someone after they've been through a battle. But honestly, sometimes those are the best interviews. My favorite ones are definitely the interviews where I'm talking to a fighter right after a fight, because I like the rawness of that moment is honestly what makes me love my job so much, because I miss having that moment for myself. So it's sort of like I'm able to live a little bit vicariously through the people that I interview, because I remember what it feels like to have that relief of winning, and the adrenaline's still pumping, so you're not feeling all your injuries yet, but maybe in a couple hours you're going to be feeling it, and the emotions of a win, particularly when I work on the Contender Series. You don't get more life changing than that for a fighter in that position. So I love being able to be a part of those moments.
But you're absolutely right. Like I never went into the cage, and whenever we had disagreements at the Gracie gym, they had a cage there, and they said, like, if you were starting to get a little testy with somebody, they'd just go in the cage, get out of the class. And no one ever went in the cage. We're like, no, we're good. it was the ultimate. But I had some friends that went and fought in some amateur fights. And, you kind of get that thing in your head where you're like, maybe I could do this. And I went and watched my friends fight in amateur fights, and I'm like, nope. Nope, all done. No thanks. I saw a guy get heel hooked, and he snapped both his shin bones.
Oh, yeah. There's some brutal stuff that can happen out there, and it takes. I don't know. I think that's what I found fascinating about it, because I'm not I don't know. I think that there are different types of people that end up being in MMA. There's athletes, there are competitors, and there are fighters. And I was definitely not a natural fighter. And I didn't grow up where I could flip the switch and like have this violent streak easily. I really had to figure out how to go there. And a lot of times it was a few minutes into a fight before I could even really switch on. But I think tapping into that sort of primal, baser instincts of fight and flight, and being able to control it as you walk, toward a cage where someone is, waiting for you. That's literally going to, it's the craziest adrenaline rush that I've certainly ever experienced. And then when you come out the other side of it, having literally subdued another human being with your fists or with your jujitsu or your, whatever the case may be, man, that is like, talk about a rush of feeling powerful. It's pretty crazy.
That is. I've only had that submission parts without the striking.
No, it's similar though. I mean, it's very similar. I was always more of a jiu-jitsu fighter, so I tended to submit more often than I would, get the TKOs. But just being able to physically subdue with someone, it's a pretty cool feeling and a very cool aspect of the sport.
And it's very humbling when it happens to you.
Yes, that is well. Yes, there's always the flip side.
Like, I thought I had that guy.
Yep.
Oh, he was strong. He had better technique than me.
Yep.
Yeah. So what do you foresee? I'll end it with this. What do you foresee for 2021 for the UFC, and then specifically for you?
Oh, that's a good question. I think for the UFC, I think it's going to be another great year. I was so, I don't know, this is going to sound like I'm sucking up, but I really do mean it. I was so inspired by what they were able to do. And in particular, Dana and Hunter and Craig and the other executives, what they were able to pull off, especially early on when regulations were super tight and changing daily, right? Everybody was like, you'd wake up and there'd be a new set of ordinances or laws, or now this is allowed and this is not allowed. And just imagine trying to put on these multi-million-dollar events while the earth is changing underneath you. I mean, it's pretty crazy what they were able to do. So I know that we'll have another great year. I'm hopeful that by, I don't know, maybe the end of summer, that we'll be back to having some sort of audience involved in what we do, but maybe not. And if not, that's okay. I mean, they've clearly figured out a system where we can still have 40 some fights a year, which is pretty amazing. And then for myself, I think I hope that 2021 will be a year of real growth for me. I love what I do so much, and I love the Contender Series, and I love reporting. But I think anybody that's been on the internet in the last few years and Googled me for any reason has probably seen that, my real aspiration would be eventually to do color commentary, whether it be for Contender Series or, obviously the dream would be to be able to do some work for the UFC itself. It's not a goal that I feel like is completely within my reach at the moment, but I hope to make some really big strides in the next year, and I feel good about that.
Well, I did do some research on you, and there's no. I look at it and go, Joe Rogan's never fought in the cage.
But Joe Rogan's Joe Rogan. I mean,
oh yeah,
I don't think.
and you're Laura Sanko, so you've got more experience than him, and you're getting there. So.
Well, I appreciate that. I hope so. I mean, I think I do think that that's probably the biggest. There's other hurdles as well, but the biggest hurdle for sure is not having a UFC resume to be able to wave around so that people, or having, being a former champion would be amazing. And I get it. They have every fighter that sees the end of their career coming as well wants to transition to broadcasting, as they should. They're passionate about the sport in the same way that I am. But broadcasting is a tricky thing, and it's not for everybody. And I don't know. I hope that one day I can get a seat at the table, because I do think that I could add a lot to the conversation there, and be a part of the team.
Nice. You're well on your way. So,
well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Question. Oh, I don't want to. That was going to be it, but I wanted to ask you. I almost forgot. How do you handle you're now getting busier with what you're doing for the UFC. Are you losing some of your hobbies, i.e., horse riding?
Yes, unfortunately I am. It's kind of sad, but I feel like I've convinced myself that riding is a little bit more ageless than being on television. So I feel like I have to kind of strike while the iron's hot, while people still find me reasonably cute.
Whatever.
But yeah, no, it's sad because I love horseback riding, and I miss competing so much. And I recently had to sell my horse for that very reason, just because he deserved to be with somebody I was leasing him out anyway. And then I thought, man, I need to really hand him over to someone else who can show him and love on him and ride him every day like he deserves to be. So, but I definitely think it's something that when my travel life slows down, or maybe my television career comes to a close, horseback riding is absolutely going to be right back at the top of the list. And my husband already knows, because literally the day that we sold my horse, he's like, "Have you already started looking for a new one?"
Yeah.
Not quite, but almost.
No, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I think, we watch you on TV and all that. We go, "Oh, she's got the perfect life" and all that. But I don't think people understand, just because you're successful in this, you're going to have to sacrifice some other things. I always have to go to the rodeo every December, in Vegas for 16 days. Mm-hmm. And my daughter's birthday's in the first part of December. So for 10 years, I missed her birthday. And that's just part of the sacrifice that you have to do when you're traveling. But thankfully, the good part about the COVID is the rodeo happened in Dallas, and I didn't have to go, and I got to be with my daughter this year. So. Oh,
that's great. Yeah, there's definitely been some blessings that have come out of the changes that I'm sure everybody has had to make in their life to one degree or another. But yeah, it's definitely, it's way less glamorous than people might think. There are certainly moments where I pinch myself and I'm sitting in Abu Dhabi and talking to Dana White, or, whatever the case may be. Those moments are there, but most of the moments are, I'm backstage surrounded by tables and boxes, and I haven't eaten in 7 hours, and I'm choking down a granola bar, and I'm sprinting to try to make my next interview.
Yeah.
It's definitely not as glamorous as people might imagine. You're
trying to remember what day it is and what time it is at home.
Yeah, exactly. And I forgot to call my son after school, and I'm like trying to FaceTime him while also trying to get my makeup done. And yeah, for sure. Exactly.
Well, what's the best way for my listeners to follow you and see what you have coming up?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm most active on Instagram. You can find me at Laura_Sanko. And then the same thing on Twitter, at Laura_Sanko. Those are the two places where I'm most active. I'm on Facebook, but not on there very often. So Instagram's definitely the best place. And I try really hard to get back to everybody who comments or messages me. So if I don't get back right away, just keep waiting. I'll get there eventually.
And for all you trolls, she does a really good job with an Aussie lady for mean tweets.
Yeah. You send me something crazy, you might get outed for sure.
You might get called out, so just be aware. Those are the best, by the way.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Well, thank you for your time. I don't want to eat up any more of it, and timing worked out great, so I want to say thank you. Yeah,
thank you. Thanks for having me on, and best of luck, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Yeah. Best wishes for 2021.
Thank you, you too.
Thanks,
bye.
Laura. Bye-bye.